At all of our symposia, we always spend time addressing a topic that makes some people uncomfortable, but everyone agrees that without a plan to finance the future, the ideas, solutions, and plans we are proposing have little merit. To make our work at these symposia meaningful and useful for public policy decision makers, we must address the issue of how we're going to pay for what is coming in the future. In terms of risk, hazards, and finance, we could probably spend a week just on that, and even then, it would be hard to come up with definitive answers. We are only going to be able to touch on the subject today, but we hope that the group that you will hear from next will at least leave you with a little bit more knowledge than you had when you came, specifically on the topic of resilience and how important that topic will be as we look to the future of risk, hazard, and finance. We are very grateful to AGS Counselor and CEO of Sandhill Geographic, Dr. Josh Campbell, for assembling this panel. Josh?
Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. It's great to be back on stage here. I'm extremely excited about this panel. I spend most of my time in Washington, D.C. Spent several years with the State Department, but it was great. I am a proud GFDRR alumnus and spent 2 years at the bank, which really started my kind of appreciation and journey for the intersection of finance and geospatial tools and geography. The bank's mission is a little bit different than what you might get in the corporate and commercial space, but I think the tools and approaches are very similar. And I think, as the folks up here are practitioners of, the emergence of this new generation of geospatial technology is changing the intersection with finance. And I think it's a new animal. The term spatial finance is in the published literature. There's a group at the University of Oxford and the Sustainable Finance Group at Oxford that have written several papers with spatial finance in the title. And it really just is the integration of geospatial data and analysis into financial theory and practice. Recently this year, the University of Twente in the Netherlands and their spatial engineering master's program has added a course on spatial finance as well. So you're starting to see the emergence of this in some interesting places. So I'll stop with that, and I'll let folks we'll start with Aaron and let them do their own introductions. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erin Bigley, and I'm the Chief Responsibility Officer at Alliance Bernstein. Just by way of background, Alliance Bernstein is a diversified global asset management firm. We manage portfolios across public stocks, bonds, multi-asset, and alternative portfolios. We are a global firm that sits across 27 different countries, and our clients include institutions, pension funds, endowments, foundations, insurance companies, as well as individual investors. And for AB, spatial finance really dovetails nicely with our work to manage climate risks within our portfolios. We recognize that climate change presents very material risks as well as opportunities for our investment portfolios, and that we need to partner with organizations like Columbia to help us to manage those risks. And that's really been a driving force behind that partnership that we have with Columbia, is to manage those risks, because we think that in managing those risks, we can really develop better outcomes for our clients, really develop an investment edge. As part of that partnership with Columbia, which started in 2019, with some basic partnership on education, because folks in my firm are experts in industry and issuer and sector and country analysis, but not necessarily climate scientists. And so we partnered with Columbia to develop an educational set of trainings to help bring climate science to our investment portfolios, and to also reciprocally bring investment practices to the Columbia professors. That has subsequently, since 2019, led to different research partnerships between our organizations, one of which, about a year or so ago, was a partnership with the Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia, where we partnered to update their Natural Hazards Index. And the Natural Hazards Index is a tool that allows you to assess physical risk across the United States. It's an interactive, web-based application, and you can basically click on the census tract or county level to get an understanding of 14 different perils in each community that range from earthquakes, wildfires, droughts, hurricanes, et cetera. And they're ranked from 1 very low to 5 very high, and then they can be rolled up and layered together to get an overall perspective of each community's overall hazard risk. That is very helpful to help us understand the magnitude of perils in each municipality or geography. And then what AB does is pair that knowledge of the magnitude and the spread of those perils with the economic cost, which certainly varies by geography and by type of peril. So if you look at, for example, hurricanes, they cost a lot more than other types of hazards like earthquakes or volcanoes. And so for us to determine the investment risk within our portfolios, we want to tie the natural hazard levels with some sort of measure of cost. And so we've gathered data from the USGS and other sources to say, okay, here's how much this hazard might cost, here's how intense it could be, and that gives us an overall assessment of investment risk within our portfolios. And when you look at that spread across the United States, you find that it's really bifurcated, and that the magnitude of those risks tend to be very high in places like coastal United States, not surprising, either the hurricane side on the East Coast or the earthquake and wildfire risk on the West Coast, and much milder in places like the Midwest. We then take that information and bring it to our portfolios, in particular our municipal bond and our mortgage-backed portfolios, where we're investing in communities and properties all over the country, and that information helps us to make our buy and sell decision and can influence whether we want, what sort of valuation we might be demanding for a particular mortgage-backed security or municipal bond.
Great stuff. My name is Will Caddell. I run a geospatial company called Spark Geo. We put maps on the internet, or at least that's what we did in 2010 when we started. We have a thesis that geospatial technology, or geospatial in general, is changing everything. And we have this kind of unique vertical purview where we get to sort of see how our industry's rolling. My favorite view of our planet is the one that's slightly at an oblique, that allows you to see quite how thin our atmosphere is. So the Kármán line is 100 kilometers beyond the surface of our planet. And we lose our ability to breathe much beyond sort of 8,000 meters. That's where all the big high mountains are. These aren't really very big distances when we think about, you can drive 100 kilometers in an hour. So if you think about that as our fragile skin, our film of existence against space, we really have to start thinking about that fragility and how little space we have to work with. So maybe you're familiar with Pandora. She was given a box by Zeus, I think in vengeance for Prometheus taking fire from the heavens. And curiosity caused her to open that box. And from that box, all these evils emerged. I think we're seeing an increasing number of those evils that are presenting themselves as chaos across our planet. What I find deeply interesting is that chaos has geography. If you think of wildfire, you can think of drawing lines around wildfire burn scars. And now you think within a catchment, those wildfire burn scars add up to an increased level of water flowing as opposed to absorbency. One of the facets of wildfire, which I'm very familiar with, I live in British Columbia. I like to say I live north of the wall, if anyone's familiar with that. One of the things about wildfire is it leaves a hydrophobic layer. When you have a carbon layer, water flows instead of being absorbed. Over a catchment, you end up with massive discharge problems. The absolute level of water is the same. The absolute level of water flow is the same, but your discharge spikes. And that's why you can have wildfires and extreme heat causing flooding and infrastructural damage, causing massive resilience problems. And the interesting thing about fires or heat causing flooding is we have these geographic paradoxes happening across our planet on a day-to-day basis. We are in a unique position today. There's a rise of 5 complementary assets that give our community as geographers, as technical digital geographers, a unique opportunity that we haven't seen in the last 10 years. The rise of the cloud, smart devices, AI, open standards, openness, and the rise of smart space all together give rise to a set of net new capabilities that simply didn't exist in our community 10 years ago. Each one of those things did, but if you can imagine a Venn diagram, all those independent complementary assets have grown to a point where there is a net new series of capabilities that allow digital geographers like ourselves to do net new things. And I think those capabilities are still somewhat undiscovered. Finally, I wanted to point out that there was one thing left in Pandora's box, and that one thing was hope. And I think our net new capabilities, combined with important conversations like this, give me some sense of hope. So that's me.
Oh, that's great, Will. I just realized, guys, I'm sorry, the slides weren't up. So before Jamie goes, do you have slides that you're?
I do have slides.
Okay, well, let's make sure we get. So you'll go there.
Sure.
We'll make sure that they're running.
I hope they can do their slides too. Sure.
You got to wait for it to show up, and then
Show
you
up
can
here?
advance.
Okay,
So.
sure. Well, before that comes on, I really appreciate you all being here on a Friday talking about the end of the world. I know it's not the funnest topic, but it's an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, in the spirit of that, this is a slide that I present every single person I talk to, every client we talk to, but really to ground us on why we're here, right? All kinds of technologies, all kinds of things, really cool things, but really we're at this this juncture in planetary history where we're seeing massive spikes in CO2 emissions and really facing this major biodiversity extinction event. And that's really why we're here. So I know this topic is about finance. At the end of the day, this is what's driving a lot of the work we do. And I know in this room as well, a lot of the work that you all are doing. And really, when we talk about finance, the piece that really concerns me the most, and I think our team, is this idea that the environment and the financial systems are intertwined. Right? And we sometimes forget about this. We think the economy and the environment are two separate things. We hear about that a lot. Oh, well, we can't do this for the environment because of the economy, blah, 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 blah. But really, they are intertwined. It's just we haven't been able to figure out how to action that. So when we start talking about these planetary risks, we're already seeing massive, massive economic impacts. Trillions and trillions of dollars. Swiss Re projects this to be upwards of 18% of GDP, right? Every single year being lost to these climate events. So when we're talking about the environment, this isn't a side story. This is the economy. And the way that the planet's changing is going to be impacting this economy in greater and greater ways. And it's happening now, right? It's happening in every single sector. I remember a time in my lifetime, I feel like I'm getting old, but where I couldn't remember one extreme event that ever happened to me or my family. I live in Ottawa, Canada. We've been pretty lucky. But just over the past 4 years, we have flood, we have drought, we got hit by wildfires. These things are happening. They're becoming more frequent and more severe. And these are posing massive economic impacts. So when we start thinking about the actual economic viability, the financial viability of our systems, this becomes the core question for us. How do we address this? 18% of GDP per year being lost potentially to these climate events. What does that look like? That world does not look like the world we're living in now. So this got us to start thinking about what does that mean in the climate context, right? And really, there's great climate scenarios, great climate projections, but the one piece as a climate scientist that's always had me the most concerned is this idea that extreme events are becoming more frequent and more severe, right? And that's going to be a trend. right? And to Will's point, more chaotic, right? So that's where these things are happening, really less visibility into these things. So in our view, what we're trying to do is really connect the economy using spatial finance to the environment and to these extremes. And so how we're doing that, it's a multi-layered partnership. We partnered with Dun & Bradstreet, we've partnered with Google Cloud, and then we have our own scientists and team within Climate Engine to build a product called Spatiify. And it really is this spatial finance joining, right? So it's really this level of like, this idea that all these events are happening somewhere. If we can get the granular data and ladder that stuff up, maybe we can start predicting where these events are gonna happen and predict the financial impacts, just like we're predicting the weather. So the key features that we're focused on, again, we're focused on location. So we've got 270 million business locations all over the world that we're tracking on a monthly basis, including key economic attributes. So location, obviously, the employment, revenue, who owns it, what happens there. Like these are sort of the key components, really at the specific location level, and then joining that with the climactic data across different timescales. So the historical risk, current, what's happening today, forecast the next 1 to 14 days, and then the climate scenarios, the climate projections. And really what we end up is something like this. And these are the kind of things that, when I started this as a scientist, I thought the finance industry, this was kind of sorted. But it's not, right? So what you're seeing here are 4 million business locations in Florida being hit by Hurricane Ian, right? And overlaying and joining these data sets together, we can start getting a sense of what are the economic impacts, what are those financial impacts. And we can get down to the granular level, so we're actually looking at specific locations. And to Aaron's point, the hazards, right? So not every location has the same type of risk. So what is this location? What happens at location? How resilient are they to these events? That becomes really, really important as we're laddering up this important information. And then obviously multi-hazards, right? So hurricane is not just wind, it's also precipitation. So we start looking at where these extreme precipitation events are, how that overlays with flood risk mapping to get really granular levels of risk. So anyways, this is still a very dark world I'm presenting, but this is where we're putting most of our efforts into really trying to join these things together and hopefully start building a more resilient financial system. But with that, let me pass it over to Mike. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Jamie. Let's see if I get this right.
Wait till it loads and then.
I think it's.
Yeah, just chill he's got to switch it, and then now you're up.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So my name's Mike. I'm the Director of North America at Earth Daily Analytics, and I'm excited to be here because actually spatial finance is my favorite topic. I've lived in New York for 23 years. I love talking about restaurants and movies and basketball, but I actually love spatial finance even more, and I'm gonna explain why. If I can. Okay. So the reason I'm so passionate about it is I started my career with Clinton Gore. I was an assistant for Al Gore. I wish I could say I worked on exciting environmental projects, but basically I was a coffee getter, and I was the person that had those placards, the charts, so I held the charts. But that really gave me my initial passion for climate risk, climate change. And that drove me, being from New York, into financial services. So I spent my entire career after DC in financial services, working with the JPMCs and the cities and the B of A's of the world, which brought me to Moody's, where I focused on the ESG sustainability risk side. And while at Moody's, I was operating the energy division, where we were doing sustainability reporting for large energy companies based in Houston. And actually, I was in Calgary with Will last week. So Houston, Calgary, energy companies, working very closely with them on their sustainability reports. And questions would come up over and over again for these energy companies, like were there any methane emission leaks in, let's say, the Permian Basin in Texas? So what I found time and time again is the response I was getting from these energy companies was no methane emission leaks. Across 19 basins, thousands and thousands of locations, zero. Well, I knew that was probably statistically incorrect. And I could tell when I was interviewing those energy execs that they knew. But they knew I could never find out, right? What am I going to do? Drive a truck across Texas looking at all the locations? So they knew I'd never know. And at that point, seeing that smirk on the face of those executives made me think there's got to be a way to hold them accountable and transparency and be more transparent. And that's what brought me to Maxar, where I ran the energy division, working closely with satellite data to capture methane emissions. There was success. The satellites had a very high threshold of being able to detection. But what we needed, and the reason I joined Earth Daily, is a daily pass every day, everywhere, of the satellites to capture methane emissions. Earth Daily is launching 10 satellites in Q2. Part of these satellites will be SWIR mission detection. So it will give us the opportunity to say, okay, Moody's can now say we have satellite data. We can see the methane emission leaks. The energy company can now say, okay, we have satellite data where we can see methane emission leaks. The regulators can see that. So then the BlackRocks of the world can make decisions in their portfolio. What I was finding is that at Moody's, I was giving a sustainability rating based on their response, based on their mitigation program. That was then rolling up to BlackRock, who's making decisions on their portfolio based on information of no, we don't have any methane emission leaks. Sorry, none. And the good news is that there is now transparency, not just for methane, forest fire, insurance, across spatial finance. So now decisions can be made based on observable truth, whether it's satellites, whether it's drones, whether it's ground sensors. This data is now available so you can make those decisions. As you can see here on the right is a map of assets. So now you can take a look at all of your assets, like an energy company. You can then see all of these assets from space, from drones, from balloons, from planes, to be able to make financial decisions. Now that, to me, is extremely exciting and the reason I'm so passionate about this topic. Thank you for letting me participate.
Super interesting. The focus on that, I think one of the things to start to pull the thread on, in my mind, is why is it spatial finance? Is in the back of my mind. Why isn't it just finance? Right. So I wonder, from each of your perspectives, if you could talk a little bit about, what is the demand signal that you're seeing? Like, what demand signal do you have? Like the work you're doing with Columbia to answer a specific thing, and just what you're seeing in different verticals, or if there are specific things that folks are coming to you to try to find answers for. So we'll start with you, Erin.
Okay. You asked me this earlier, and I definitely feel strongly that spatial finance is part and parcel to traditional finance, right? And when we think about investing, it's often thought of as, climate-aware investing or ESG investing, but a large part of that is just incorporating what are very material risks into your traditional investment process. So we're using spatial finance data in our good old-fashioned municipal bond portfolios and our good old-fashioned mortgage-backed portfolios. So I view it very much as just formalizing as part of your process of way to incorporate a very material risk that you're facing, in our case, physical risk from climate change. And so we love to, in the investment world, think of new terms and new frameworks and call it something else, but I think it's just a more formalized way to incorporate an important risk into very traditional finance.
So in the geography world, as digital geographies evolved, many industries have rediscovered geography, so they rebrand it, and then it kind of slowly falls away as it gets incorporated. Yeah. So I'm like, is this just the newest new geography?
I mean, I have a difficult relationship with names. I think, is spatial special? I think it might be for a little bit, and then I think to your point, we'll just forget about the spatial piece. It'll just be finance, and these are just better tools or more useful tools, or they allow us to look over our national neighbors' shoulders at their homework, at what they're doing, and we're able to have this kind of more jurisdictionless, transparent worldview. I think those tools are neat. I think like I was saying before, I do think there's something special about the capabilities we have now, which are different. You know, Mike was talking about that. I think we have some new capabilities which allow us to really identify that we have a new series of tricks up our sleeve. But does it need a special name? I'm not sure it does.
You know, it's a good question. I mean, the location is important. I think that's key. And one thing that surprised me, so, you know, I've worked for all kinds of institutions in the climate science space for over 20 years. But what surprised me about the finance side is one of the blockers is location. Right? People don't know where those risks are. To Aaron's point about the hazards, right? That layer on, okay, well, not every place has the same risk exposure to the same type of event, right? But that's always been a shocker to me, right? Is in the world of finance, people don't necessarily know where all the assets are. So you might have someone tracking a particular company, an asset manager. They might know, say, where the headquarters are. They might know some major facilities. But in terms of, like, you know, sub-facilities, supply chain, these are all mysteries. And that's a huge problem. It's a huge blind spot in the global economy. So when we start thinking about these climate risks and these impacts of climate change on the economy, they're very kind of broad, hand-wavy numbers. Oh, we lost 10 billion here. Oh, we lost 100 billion here. Okay, it's great. The previous presentation from West Point was a fantastic example. $200 million event in one small location, right? So those $1 trillion numbers I was showing before, I don't even think those are correct. Those are pretty hand-wavy, right? So the only way we can get at the specific impact is at the level of location. So I do think the spatial component is really important. Whether it becomes finance or not, I don't know. I mean, it should, right? It should just become normal practice. But I really think location is specific. And to Will's point, I think now we're starting to get the technologies to do that, right? We have all the satellites going up. We have, you know, location-specific information with the cloud, AI, all these kinds of machinery to get at that information. But I think location is absolutely critical, and I think it's the blocker to a lot of climate action, for sure.
Yeah, I'm full agreement with what Jamie said. It's about location, and it's about the assets, what they are, and those location of those assets. And the great example that I think of and I share with my friends is within private equity. It's one of the areas where they do know the location and they do know the asset. So let's say private equity is doing due diligence on a company, let's say it's a mining company with 200+ locations, areas of extraction. So currently, they're making a decision based on, okay, where are these locations? Let's assume, right? Because most of them are in a very rural, hard to get to area. Let's assume that they're all operational. Well, you're about to place a big bet in private equity, 200+ million, let's say. You don't have to assume anymore. Satellites can say, oh, we know the location, we know the asset. Satellite data can say, okay, here are the activities at each mining site. Are there piles of minerals? Are there trucks going in and out? So now private equity can make that decision of, oh, okay, we're going to invest in this company. When before, it was really just making a blind decision in some ways.
Interesting. I think there's an interesting, if you're to extrapolate out some of these ideas, there's an interesting note on language. And if we think about reversing the question, think about what the difference is, I think, like, if we think about the word scale, to a geographer, it means a particular thing. It means, you know, we're working at a particular scale. It's a series of numbers that we understand. It's the multiplier of the planet. That's great. To a digital geographer, it might also mean something about compute power. It might mean something about business. But if you start thinking about the scale of spatial finance, you start quickly moving between a container, a vessel of containers, a single property, and a portfolio of properties. And suddenly, scale becomes a really interesting question of both assets and multiples of an asset, which to a typical sort of geographer is an interesting sort of difference in practice.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, you often see the term spatial finance in association with the Sustainability Center at Oxford, or climate finance, or green finance is another name. So I think it might be useful. I'd like to go back to you, Mike, for what you were talking about. Like, you know, what is ESG and what is it inside of finance now? And I don't know, I think it'd just be useful to pick apart, you know, how just the calculations are changing. And is spatial finance always going to be associated just with environmental kinds of questions, or is it going to, you know, open-ended question? But I thought
Sure.
your topics on the methane leaks were a good one.
Yeah, definitely. And the way I see ESG, it's just another term for risk, whether that's climate risk, physical risk, transition risk. So determining these risk metrics, like when I was at Moody's, we were doing risk analysis to say, are there methane emission leaks? If there are, there's a risk to the brand. The financial service institution, BlackRock, let's say, wants to know that risk. They want to know energy company A and energy company B, there are more methane emissions with A, so what leaks? So we're going to invest in B. So across the board, ESG is just really risk, and I believe that geography, sensors, data, spatial finance is the true way to quantify risk.
Maybe the first thing we do is, what's E and S and G?
Yeah.
And then I wonder, I'm assuming you have some thoughts on this.
I do. Right, so environmental, social, and governance is what E, S, and G stand for. And I agree with what Mike said, is that a lot of E, S, and G in investing is about risk. I think it can also be about opportunity as well, because I think risk is very important, but there can also be opportunities. And I think about ESG investing in two ways. I think what I was talking about earlier, where you kind of just incorporating spatial finance concepts and data into your traditional investing, to me, that is ESG integration, where you are simply incorporating those environmental factors or social or governance factors into a traditional investment process. It could be growth stocks, it could be bond portfolios, it could be alternatives, but you're basically integrating those factors more formally into your traditional investment process. I think there can be a second type of ESG investing that is what I call ESG-focused portfolios, meaning you still have a traditional risk and return objective, you want to beat a certain benchmark, but along with that, you have some sort of ESG focus or theme or tilt that you want to make, meaning it might be a low-carbon portfolio, or it might be an impact portfolio, or a resilience portfolio, but you've got some sort of theme that is helping you narrow down your investment universe or driving some of the decisions that you are making. And I think those two things are very different. One has a specific intentionality around it in terms of the theme, and the other is very mainstream and very broad-based. At our firm, we employ ESG integration across the majority of our actively managed portfolios, and the ESG-focused portfolios are a newer but growing part of the business, but a smaller part.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Will, I don't know, is this something in your world, or do you think through this lens?
Absolutely. Well, we try to. I mean, we come at it from a geospatial perspective, and we try to understand the finance perspective. So I'll caveat my observations with that. I think what Erin's saying from a geographic perspective implies understanding time, and more specifically, understanding change within time. Because, and I think what we have now with Mike's team and others, we have this ability to measure things through time. Time being like the central vector of change through geography. So now we have the tools to measure landscape changes and human activities through time. We're able to, within the purview of finance experts, parse that landscape change into a real sort of financial metric, and then we have a portfolio. I mean, I have to say, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have a hardcore London financier, like a blue-suited financier, come up to me and say, Will, tell me about mangroves. I really want to know about measuring and monitoring mangroves. That would, this guy would typically have been looking at real estate somewhere and real estate investments, but now he's very motivated, and this is a real example, very motivated to create carbon credits through the conservation of mangroves because he thinks there's a real financial play. That's interesting, and it's a geographic product that this individual is motivated to purchase so he can measure, create some kind of financial product and take that to market.
Interesting. Well, Jamie, I'd let you respond to that, or I can kick you another question if you have anything you want to talk about with ESG.
I'm not a huge fan of ESG.
There we go.
I hate to say it. I think it's a bit strange to mangle, sorry, mangle's the wrong word, but to mix some, I'm French Canadian, so mélange is the word I'm thinking about. But like, environment, social, and governance. They're three very, very different things, I think there's a lot of pushback on ESG right now. You're seeing a lot of that from the investor community. And my sense is that the space we're in, the environmental space, itself is so complex and so deep, it's hard to get sort of mixed in with, not to say the social side and the government side is not important, they're super important. But I think the world that we're living in is becoming very rational. Is there a risk? What's the cost of that risk? Who's getting hit by that risk? What's the downstream impact of that risk, of this event, that event, this event? As I said before, these events are becoming more frequent, more severe, right? So whether there's a social and government side to it, you could debate it, maybe a bit more of an academic debate, but the actual financial impacts are super clear, right? So I don't dislike ESG as a term. I just think it's, when we're mixing these things together, something gets lost, I think.
I would agree there's a lot of controversy right now around ESG, but I do think that what most people would not argue with is what you were just saying. Like when it comes to materiality and dollars and cents in your portfolio, if you're incorporating something that's a true risk or doing something that's really adding value, very few will argue with that. I think there's more disagreements, I would say, maybe on the ESG-focused portfolio side, where people have very different opinions in that space.
Agreed. And I think, I have a lot of friends who are like, hey, I just invested in this ESG thing, and somehow there's a vodka company in my ESG portfolio. How did that happen? I'm like, I don't know.
That's
sustainable wheat.
Exactly.
I don't know. It doesn't seem good. But yeah.
Well, I want to just quickly, the question of why now, right? Why are we seeing this emergence from a technological perspective? It seems like there's several threads that are coming together. I worked at a remote sensing center in Kansas 20 years ago. We were selling remote sensing derived yield forecasts to corn traders. We didn't call it spatial finance. We didn't really call it finance at all, right? So there's been this intersection. So I wondered if you might, and we can start with you, Jamie. I think, let's highlight some of the key technologies. Like, what is emerging on the technological front that's now allowing us to do this?
Yeah, I think Will did a fantastic job of laying out the sort of different drivers. There's the satellite remote sensing technology. There's all the observed systems. There's the location awareness, the cloud processing. These aren't things you can run on your laptop. So some of these analytics that we use, would take 1,000 years on my laptop to produce, right? So we're talking about massive multi-parallelized processing that's required for this. But I also think I think two big drivers. COVID, I think, especially in the Western world, I think we're like, oh, bad things can happen to us, right? Really, really bad things can happen. So this idea of risk, I think, got elevated, at least in the consciousness. And then the fact that bad things are happening. They're happening everywhere. We're getting hit. The wildfires this year, how often has anybody been covered in wildfire smoke? I know for me, 0. Never in my lifetime. But I spent a month with the worst air quality in the world, right, at the time. So I think it's the fact that these things are happening and people are trying to grapple with, what does this mean? What does this mean for my institution? What does this mean for our economies, our societies, our healthcare systems? And all of these are location specific. So I think that's where the spatial side is really, getting a lot of steam.
So Mike, I mean, you guys are going to space, right? And the economics of being able to do that
Take me
are
with
now
you.
fundamentally different, you know? I'm assuming you have some thoughts on the technology piece that's enabling this.
Well, yeah, that's the exciting part of why now, is that the cost of launch has gone way down, thanks to, you don't want to give them credit, but SpaceX, right? The ride, the jump on the payload is much less. In addition, our satellites are about the size of the podium over there. In the past, when I was at Maxar, I got the opportunity to go to the manufacturing site. The satellites were the size of this big screen here. And the cost, instead of the satellite like the size of the screen being $1 billion in 7 years, they're now like the podium, which is, I don't know the real cost, maybe 50 million or 100 million, I guess, with a much cheaper ride. So which was $1.5 billion in 8 years is now 1.5 years, 2 years, and a couple $100 million. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I wanted to go back to Aaron. All of this is new. These domains are coming together. That means there's learning on both sides. And there's education that has to happen. And I thought, looking through the AB website, came across something that I thought, the Climate Academy.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you wanted to speak to that just for a little bit.
Yeah, going back to my initial comments, I think that in solving some of these challenges, managing these risks, it can be difficult to do that in isolation. And so partnerships are really key. Partnering with data providers, partnering with universities like Columbia is a really important way for us to stay on the cutting edge of the latest thinking in spatial finance, in climate science. And so that has caused us to create this formal partnership with Columbia. And the Climate Academy is really the result of the past 4 years of our work together with the climate scientists to try to bring the best thinking in climate science together with the best thinking in investments and finance, and to bring that to the public on topics like emerging markets and climate change, physical risk and spatial finance like the Natural Hazards Index that I was talking about, China's decarbonization, global food security. So there's a whole array of topics that we've done work on in partnership, and we've used it first to educate our own investors, but then we've actually brought it public to our clients. I would offer that if anybody is interested, feel free to email us. We're happy to share those modules externally. But they've been very helpful, both internally and I think externally from an education perspective.
Oh, that's wonderful. I really do want to have. Do you have a question? Yeah, go for it.
I was interested in what Dr. Herring said about companies sometimes not knowing where all of their assets are and the risk that produces. And I was wondering if you or any of the other panelists, from that and my own experience doing open source mapping of corporate structures, whether intentionally complex corporate structures or ownership structures is a cause of that, and if so, if those structures could be a source of risk for resiliency planning. Thank you.
That's a great question. I hadn't thought about that. Possibly. I think. I guess when we're thinking about clients, so we work a lot with data science teams and quant shops at different capital markets groups. That's our primary sort of client type. I don't know if it's the structure of the companies that's. I think it's a capacity issue, quite honestly. And the complexity of the global economic system. I think it's beyond. It's one of these things that's just hard for humans to really kind of grasp. So, but I guess you're asking like the purposeful obfuscation of ownership of things. Yeah, probably is part of the problem. Yeah, but I don't think that's the only problem. I think it's just the function that the global economic system is just massively complicated, and it's a blind spot, quite honestly. And yeah, a great question. Thank you.
That resonate with you at all? Thinking about corporate structures and I guess maybe whether assets are being obfuscated, or it's an interesting question.
I think it's a disclosure issue, and there's so much that's being asked to be disclosed, or that would be helpful if it was disclosed, but may not be required. And so I think there's just a lot of data that's hard to come by because it's not mandated to be disclosed. As we move forward, there's more and more regulation that is coming into play that's going to create standardized reporting and disclosure, and that I think that will really help us understand better the risks around companies.
I would also argue that some organizations at a corporate level do not know where all their assets are. I think maybe at the baseline they maybe do. Maybe leases are being paid, X, Y, Z. But at a corporate level, I think it's hard.
Yeah, I think our Department of Defense, having to dig so deep in the arsenal, realized that they didn't quite know where a whole bunch of stuff was too. So I don't think it's just corporate worlds that it might occur to. So I think, are we at time, John? Okay, well, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedules to come and speak with us, bring your viewpoint and perspective on this topic. So thanks from me and the AGS.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Bigley, AllianceBernstein's Chief Responsibility Officer. We believe that climate change can have a material impact on investment outcomes. As climate-related policies and regulations continue to increase in volume around the globe, we continue to strategize about how AB can prepare our business and those in which we invest for long-term success in a lower carbon world. A key part of this work is education and partnership. AB recognizes the importance of ongoing education of both our investors and our clients on the latest research around climate issues. One way we do this is through our collaboration with Columbia University's Climate School and its climate scientists. One of the fruits of this partnership is the Natural Hazards Index tool, which we launched earlier this year alongside Columbia's National Center for Disaster Preparedness to better examine physical climate risks across the U.S. This week, we're launching Climate Academy 2.0 for our clients. It's an educational series covering several climate-related topics, including carbon markets, emerging markets and the energy transition, and China's decarbonization challenges and opportunities. We recognize that there are also material social risks related to climate change, which should be managed. To better understand the intersections of these risks, we collaborated with eCornell, Cornell University's external education unit, on a training for our investors that included a session on the elements of a just transition. We're also working on a publication with Walk Free, an international human rights organization, on the financial materiality at the intersection of climate change and human rights. We're harnessing our climate knowledge to also develop our Climate Transition Assessment and Engagement Framework, a tool designed to allow our investment teams to consistently identify material risks and opportunities for high-impact issuers within our clients' portfolios, and to signal where our investors should focus engagements with these issuers over the long term. The goal is to better understand how our investee companies are preparing their businesses to be successful in a lower carbon economy. We're also leveraging our climate knowledge to inform how we act as a business. AB is working to reduce carbon emissions in our operations, in part by working to locate 85% of our employees in greener workspaces by 2025. Doing so will also encourage collaboration and foster engagement and wellness. As of March 2023, with our London offices moved to a greener building, we've met 60% of our goal, and our New York office move will follow in 2024. At AllianceBernstein, we hope to build on these efforts as we navigate the energy transition and the effects it will have on both our business and the issuers in which we invest. I'm looking forward to sharing more of what AB has in store.